Hi everyone, we've got Rich here in Winchester, we've got Rob in Sheffield, and I'm delighted to say that we've been joined by Simon Hallett, the owner and chairman of Plymouth Argyle, who is currently in the States. Simon, good afternoon or good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon, both. Nice to
Hi,
see you.
Simon.
How has your summer been? Busy?
It's been extremely busy. Yeah, I've had a whole bunch of issues that have distracted me from my day job, from football, from almost everything. So it's been very, very busy, but calming down now.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to start, Simon. Could you just give us an introduction? You know, how a man from Devon is now living in the US and owning Devon's Premier Football Club.
Oh, thank you for that. Um,
Sorry,
yeah,
ecstasy.
it's the story goes back to when I was 25. I'm almost 70 now, so 55 years ago. Somebody offered me a job in Hong Kong, and although I was married and my wife was a school teacher, we decided to uproot and go and live in Hong Kong, where we stayed for 10 years. While I was there, I met a man who's just retired from being my business partner, David Lovner, who founded an investment firm called Harding Lovner, which is still going today, where I'm still employed today. But I uprooted my wife and three kids from Hong Kong, came to the United States in January 1991, and have been working at this investment firm ever since. So we were basically, young and foolish and took a flyer on a startup company rather than the senior position at an established investment management firm that I was at in Hong Kong. So we've lived in America for 35 years. Our children live in America, our grandchildren live in America, and we're American citizens. So we've actually, it's not so much the boy from Devon living in America. I've become an American and really clinging to my roots back in Devon and Plymouth in particular.
Have you ever used the word soccer, Simon?
I use the word soccer interchangeably with football because, and I have evidence to prove that English people of my age used to call it soccer when they were young. I have in my library, I'll send it to you afterwards, a book by Malcolm Allison that was published by the Pelham Soccer Press in the UK in the late 60s. And it's called something like An Intelligent Person's Guide to Soccer. But what's really interesting is that on the back cover, the adverts are for example, the George Best Book of Soccer, the Alan Ball Book of Soccer, Bob Wilson's Book of Soccer Goalkeeping, Derek Dugan's Book of Soccer. And the fact is, as I keep telling Argyle fans when they moan about me being an American, calling it soccer, I call it soccer because I'm old, not because I'm an American. We all used to call it soccer.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know the evolution of that word because it does have very very US connotations now. But like you say, in the
No,
seventies,
it was shorthand for Association Football.
Association football. Yeah.
yeah,
Actually, Stefan Szymanski, who you'll know, Rob, he wrote done a lot of the. He was an academic in the United States at the University of Michigan, I think, who has done a
Yes,
lot of
yes.
academic work on data and so on, and wrote the book with Simon Cooper, Soccernomics.
Hmm.
Actually, was it Soccernomics or its successor?
Yes, economics. Yeah, great
Uh,
book.
but Stefan has actually written a book about why it's called soccer in large parts of the world, and people in England stick to football. Anyway, it's one of those non-arguments as far as I'm concerned.
and how did you talk us through the your involvement with Plymouth? How did that come about?
Well, so I've been an Argyle fan since 1966 when my family moved to Plymouth, and I went to uh, high school in Plymouth, to Plymouth College, which was a rugby playing school. But I spent the first, the years between 5 and 10 in South London, where we all played soccer or football at primary school. So I was a football fan, and although Plymouth College was a rugby playing school, I used to kick balls around in the park with my mates, whenever I could. And I started going to Home Park in 1966 for the first season after we arrived in Devon. So soon after England won the World Cup. Um, so I've been an Argyle fan, standing at the Devonport end since the mid 60s, and I made some money in the investment world, and we sold part of our firm back in 2008, actually. And a couple of years later, I was chatting to one of my partners on a road trip back from Manhattan, and we were discussing whether we should go out and buy a minor league baseball club. And he said, "Well, why don't you just go and buy that, or buy part of that club that you're always banging on about in Devon?" So I gave them a call, and an old acquaintance of mine put me in touch with the then owner, James Brent, and he offered me a piece of the company, and I bought it. I think it was partly from him and partly the issue of new shares, and I gradually got sucked in. So the route to majority ownership was partly a kind of emotional journey from wanting to have a bit of fun and get closer to the club I supported, but have a seat on the board, so get an inside view as a fan, basically. But I was the equity owner who funded a lot of the investments that we've made at Argyle over the last 9 years, basically. And so I gradually acquired control, but it wasn't that I set out to become the owner of a football club. I set out to become a minority owner, have a board seat, and get an inside look at how the club I supported worked. So it wasn't a strategy, but it's been a very enjoyable ride so far anyway, I must say.
I love that story, Rich. Just to interject there quickly, because there's that risk taking that you experienced in the early part of your career when you were in Hong Kong before you moved to the States. You mentioned about, not necessarily going through the conventional investment firm route, setting up with a startup. There's an element of risk associated with that, and of course, looking back on that now, 35 or so years later, you can say, well, it was a risk worth taking because the firm is doing particularly well. But there's also an element of risk in that road trip conversation that you had. Well, let's have a look at minor league baseball, and then pivoting quite quickly to, well, hang on, I'm a Plymouth Argyle fan. Let's see if I can get involved with that. It would be nice to see what happens behind the curtain, and all of a sudden you're then a majority shareholder and essentially pulling some of the strings as well. So do you think that's a characterisation of you and how you've always sought to do business? Is that how you ultimately fell into it, or was it something a little bit more strategic?
No, it is about risk taking. It's about exposing yourself to variance effectively. If you kind of knew me, you'd see me as a rather conservative person. My kind of hobbies are, fishing and reading books, and I don't wear fancy clothes. I drive a Hyundai Tucson. Actually, that's not quite true. I do have a 15-year-old sports car as well. But we look like rather dull, conservative people, and in many respects we are. But we've taken two big risks in our lives. One was to move to Hong Kong at a very young age, where we did consider the downside. We were young, we had qualifications, we had good degrees, so we explicitly said, well, if it all goes wrong, we can at least come back and start again, and we'll just be, a couple of years behind similar people of our age. And then coming to America again was a huge risk. I came on a 3-year visa with a wife and a young family of girls who are 6, 4, and 2, to join a startup company, having given up being a director of one of the largest fund management companies in Asia. So I do believe in taking risks, but I believe that you should take risks where the downside is protected. And at Argyle, we've taken risks. We're a club that aspires to compete in the championship, where we're competing with clubs with resources that are far greater than ours, either because they charge higher prices for tickets, because they have greater ground capacity, because they have access to a wider and richer range of commercial sponsors, or of course, close to your heart, Rob, because they're getting parachute payments. So if we're going to compete successfully with them, it means that we have to do things differently from them. And that means taking risks. And I think one of the things that I'm proudest of at Argyle is that we explicitly set out 7 or 8 years ago to do things a little bit differently. It used to drive me nuts at board meetings when people who've been around football for decades would say, "That's the way we do it in football, Simon." And I'd explode in rage and say, football's crap. The toilets stink. The experience at the ground on Saturday is awful. Half the clubs go bust every 20 years. The way we do it in football is not a very good way. And people again used to say, well, Argyle's pretty well managed for a football club. And my reaction was that that's too low a bar for us to want to aspire to. We want to be well managed, not just well managed for a football club. So I guess the big thing that we decided to do 7 or 8 years ago was, when I said that there will be money available, not as much as ended up being available, I must admit, but there will be money available. We decided to go down the route of improving the fan experience rather than investing on the pitch. And of course, old football hands would say, you've got to spend money on the pitch, Simon. You've got to spend money on the pitch. That's all the fans care about. And I think we know from the American experience that that's not all fans care about. Fans care that, the food and drink that you can get is of reasonable quality and reasonably priced. They care that the toilets are clean. They care that, the ground looks nice. And I think that that's been very, very successful for us. We've restored a sense of pride in the football club. And I'm pretty certain that it's not because of the success on the pitch, though obviously we have been successful on the pitch apart from the last 12 months, but it's because we improved the fan experience in the broadest possible sense. We've basically invested in the offering that we give to our fans, not just on Saturday afternoon, but throughout the week, through our communications, through our marketing, and through our access to all the facilities at the club. Yeah. We actually had as close to a natural experiment as you can get. I could have my years wrong, but between 2019 and 2024, and of course, somebody will say it's not a very good natural experiment because it includes COVID. But if you exclude that enormous elephant, between 2019 and 2024, we finished similarly. Maybe it was 2018, 2023. We finished in similar position in League One, 7th after a failed playoff push, but our attendances were up 40 or 50%. So, we were producing almost exactly the same stuff on the pitch, but more people were coming half a decade later after, investment in the grandstand, investment in the little things, changing the dirty seats, changing the broken seats, painting the ground, making sure that the ground looked good, and so on and so on. So, not just the big visible things around the, in particular the grandstand, but the little things, making sure that the rubbish was cleared up, making sure that, broken things were fixed or removed, making sure that the signage was good and fresh looking. So it's been a long journey of investing in fans, really.
I remember when I first met you, actually, Simon, and it was over a median like this, and it probably was just about during COVID, maybe just after. And it struck me when I first met you that you were intensely driven by those small details, and it was that what happens on the field, but is and can be and often is very, very wasteful. The transfer fees that some clubs will pay, the wages, the managers that come and go. And as variables, to go back to your investment strategy, as variables, they're much more difficult to control. But all of those things you've just described, that will yield results that are both material for fans and anybody using the ground, and very tangible on an ongoing basis, are the things that make that experience, that community engagement, that desire for a fan to go back over and over and over again. I wouldn't say irrespective of what happens on the field, because I do think that plays a part at some point, but the experience of that leisure pound that is being spent at the ground, I think, is fiercely important and something that has really come through from you, certainly in the interactions I've had with you, and I think you capitalised on today, and perhaps doesn't get the airtime that it deserves either.
Maybe not. There is actually this is one of many parallels with running an investment firm, and I've talked a lot publicly about the parallels because they're both activities where outcomes, short-term outcomes in particular, are a function of both luck and skill. Yet people attribute them to skill or the lack of it, and they very rarely appreciate the role of variance or luck. In our investment firm, from day one, we basically said, right, we're obviously going to set out to offer an exceptional investment product, but we have to accept that an exceptional investment product, looking back over the long term, will have periods where that product looks lacking in skill, where the variance in results is such that you look like you're doing a bad job over the short term. So therefore, what we must control is what we can control, and what we can control is the client experience. So our client service has always been excellent. Our communications have been very straightforward. We've been transparent. Our ethical standards have been, 100%, and so on and so on. And really, yes, the same at the football club. What I wouldn't want to give the impression, though, is that we're going down the what's his name, Dave Brailsford, the British cycling route.
Yeah.
Which I
cycling, because I'm a Manchester United fan and it's not been a great experience.
so far.
Yeah.
True. The idea that that whole idea that 1% here, 1% there, all of a sudden adds up to 10% improvement, and you've got a winning team rather than a losing one. In football, you can forget the 1%, the 2%. There are 20% lying around to be taken.
Yeah.
From making the fan experience better, from improving the analysis that you use to recruit, from improving the decision making. These are huge improvements that you can make, but the end purpose is, what makes the boat go faster, and what makes the boat go faster is winning football games. And it was the case, I think, that until we started having problems about 18 months ago. Over the previous 5 years, I don't think any team in the English top 4 tiers of the English pyramid, maybe other than Arsenal or Manchester City, had won more games than Argyle. So, all this that we were doing to improve the fan experience was also to improve an important part of the fan experience, which is that they have a winning football club.
Yeah.
And, where we are today is that, we've just got relegated from the Championship after two years there. So we're back in League One, but our revenues this time around in League One are significantly higher than they were. So that strategy of improving the fan experience, but also very, very importantly, both deepening and widening our revenue base has been successful and allows us to be able to invest more or spend more on the football squad. Now, that doesn't stop people from yelling at you the whole time saying you've got to spend even more. But, the fact is the budget for this year will be almost twice what it was when we were in League One 3 years ago.
Yeah, which is really significant for the record for anybody listening to this.
Absolutely.
It's a very, very.
Yeah, sorry, and it'll be a budget where in cash flow we roughly break even.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Simon, I'm not suggesting that other owners don't have an emotional attachment with the club that they're in charge of. You could argue that perhaps, some other rather looser approach to that emotional attachment. But did it feel different when you walked through the doors at Plymouth? Were you there thinking, "Oh my God, this has been my club since 1966. I'm now in charge." Did you feel a particular? That brings with it an enormous amount of pressure, doesn't it? Especially when you're making the kind of decisions that you're making.
Well, okay, I'll probably go on too long about this. Firstly, I do have an emotional attachment to the club, and that means that decision making by somebody with a deep emotional attachment is probably not going to be optimal. So we run the club as we run a normal, well-run corporation. I'm very much a non-executive director. I don't think I've spoken to anybody at the club for 10 days. I'm not the one making recruitment decisions. I'm non-executive chairman of what I think is an effective board that sets down strategy and then leaves the CEO to lead a team of people responsible for executing it. So, fans, I've had a text this morning from a fan saying that, he hears we're going to recruit a certain player, and I have no idea if it's true or not. I suspect it's not true because it sounds ridiculous to me. But very often fans will ask me questions, and I just have to say, "I'm sorry, I don't know. It's not my job." Um, my job is to run the board, and I mean, if I was making the decisions the whole time, I'd be heavily influenced by the fact I'm a fan, and I don't think they'd be as well made. So that's one thing, but the feeling I get as the owner is just unbelievable. I mean, it's I mean, on match day I'll be at home park by 9 o'clock, and I'll sit up in the stands and I'll watch various people going about their business of, basically you watch a stadium unfold over the course of a day until 3 o'clock, okay, and the whistle goes. It's a fantastic experience. I'm very proud of what we've achieved at Argyle, and I just love being there, and I love it even more now I'm, the owner and chairman than I did before. But there is that feeling of responsibility, and even my wife feels it. So my wife has no interest in sport. Actually, that's not quite true. She watches tennis. She likes tennis, but you know, she's rather appropriate at the moment. I remember asking her about 5 years ago who Gareth Bale was, and she had no idea. Yet she can barely watch the game. She feels so emotionally involved, and I think that partly that comes not because we're watching a football game, but because we are effectively the owners of the club and responsible for people's weekends and maybe whole weeks.
I felt that experience. Sorry, Rich, I'm just going to drop in there. I spent some time with Charles Jennings at Cheltenham Town in the autumn, and being from Cheltenham, I always had an affinity for the football club. So when I took a call from one of the principal shareholders of the club, I was like, wow, this is an important guy. I'm about to go to Wadden Road. I sat in the director's box with him, and that experience that you've just talked through, I was observing with him because he was a Cheltenham boy. He'd grown up watching the club. He'd taken this partial stake, and you could tell for the whole time I was with him that even though he was entertaining and he was doing his networking, he was just on tenterhooks waiting for, is that stand going to be full? Is that going to be right?
Yeah,
I watched him pick up a bit of litter and put it in the bin because he wanted it to be
yeah,
clean and tidy.
exactly.
And then when I watched him through the game, and Cheltenham went 2-0 down, I think it was against Swindon, and you could just sense the tension and the angst that it wasn't just that Cheltenham were losing 2-0 and that was upsetting him and his son who was there with him, but he was also then a sense of responsibility for the 10,000-ish fans that were
Yeah.
in the ground that day. Cheltenham, I think they ended up losing 3-2, and he was, you know, fairly reserved after the game over a beer. But that sense of real attachment to what he had done, and in your case, what you are doing at Argyle, I reckon most fans would love to experience that, but I can imagine it's quite overwhelming at times as well.
It can be overwhelming, but it can be overwhelming in both directions. And I mean, you know, I was just saying this to somebody the other day, so I'm repeating myself. But one of my favourite old jokes is about the statistician who has his head in the oven and his feet in the fridge, and on average, he's just about fine. With football, you're either deliriously happy or you're utterly miserable. So you'd think that on average you'd be just about fine, but you're not. You're actually the deliriously happy unusually outweighs the misery. So it's been a really really enjoyable ride, despite obviously the recent misery of relegation.
But even last
But
season, Simon, and
yeah,
full disclosure, I'm a Portsmouth fan, so we were lucky to stay up while you guys went down. But I still got the sense, because Plymouth's trajectory actually has been fairly similar to Portsmouth over the last
very
few
similar.
years, and I think they're very similar clubs in many ways, and there might be a rivalry, but I think there's a grudging respect between both sets of fans. But I got the impression that even though relegation looked on the cards at points last season, a lot of Plymouth fans were still having a good time, and a lot of Plymouth fans were interacting with me on Twitter and saying how great their season had been in the Championship and what fun they were
Yeah.
fun they were having. And obviously it did end badly, but I get the feeling that this is a club that is in a very very good position to bounce back, as opposed to one that is just on the cusp of a very very rapid downward trajectory.
Oh yeah, no, we're definitely not on the cusp of a downward trajectory unless something completely unforeseen happens. We're financially we're one of the stronger clubs in League One, I think.
Yeah, very much so.
But the comparison with Portsmouth. So Portsmouth were a year behind us coming up to the Championship, and I think they probably had a similar budget to us. One of the things I don't like is that as fans or even people at the club saying, well, we didn't have much of a chance in the Championship because our budget was so low. And it's true, we think, bottom three football budget, but based on a break even. Right, but I suspect we're actually going to we get to do the final accounts, but I suspect we're actually going to make money in the year of relegation, which is going to be embarrassing. But
Rare.
because of
I doffed my
fortune
cap.
incomes and player trades. Sorry.
Yeah. I said
Yeah.
it's a rare finding, but I doff my cap, and of course you beat Liverpool in
Well,
January, winning the FA Cup, so there's a little boost from that.
yeah. Well, we had the cup run. We had some player trading that we embarked on over the last 3 years, which the money came in, but we've yet to spend it. Um, we didn't get relegated because we had the lowest budget. We got relegated because we made some poor decisions. So, I'm partly responsible for those decisions. So, frankly, I didn't enjoy it. I mean, I enjoyed the day against Liverpool, but the probability of relegation on almost all the models that we could come up with was very, very high from December. And in January, we took a risk on changing the manager, but we thought that would give us, basically 50-50 chance of staying up, particularly as we'd had a whole bunch of injuries and some of those players were going to be coming back in January and February. But it was a 50-50 chance of staying up rather than a high 90s probability of relegation. So we decided to make that move, and it didn't pay off. Then the manager that we hired walked out on us. So I'm very aware of the danger of looking at the outcomes and saying it was a bad decision. But I think in some ways, we didn't have the hiring of Rooney didn't work out. The hiring of Muslic, frankly, didn't work out either. And you shouldn't just look at the outcomes of decisions when there's so much uncertainty. But I think that the decisions were well made, but when the outcomes are so bad, you tend to feel responsible. So I don't think I enjoyed it as much as the fans. But look, the broader point is that we have restored faith in Argyle after administration, and then under James Brent, my predecessor, we began the process, and I think James was always very clear that his goal was he was not an Argyle fan when he started. He wasn't even a football fan, but he'd always said that his goal was to kind of stabilise the club and then find somebody who could help it push on. So he achieved his goal, and I think and good for him. But my goal is in some ways to help us push on even further from League One.
We talked about risk earlier, Simon, and you alluded to it there. Did you see the appointment of Wayne Rooney as a risk? Obviously he brought a massive profile to the club.
I think the way our process for hiring managers works has been the same now for. Well, it has evolved, but it's been roughly the same. We start off with a long list that has certain characteristics that we're looking for. We've added the use of data, we've added the use of personality traits over the years, but it's basically the same process that we used in my first managerial hire when we hired Ryan Lowe and Stephen Schumacher. We start off with a list of characteristics, find managers that meet those characteristics. Now we can use data more now to identify some of those characteristics. You then start calling around saying, who's actually interested. That gets you down to a much shorter list. And you then, in the most recent case, we then had Stuart Webber working for us. We had David Fox working for us, who they did a round of interviews that was entirely about football, training periodicity and stuff like that. And then we came to final day when we interviewed a short list of 3 or 4 people, all of whom I think would have been viable candidates. And on the day with Wayne, he blew us away with his football knowledge, with the analysis he'd done of our squad. He was just the best candidate on the day. The kind of talk at Argyle and talk in some of the media was that we hired him because of his celebrity status, but we actually hired him despite that. I mean, it is, people don't believe me when I say so, but it is the simple fact. During the interview process, somebody actually started talking about the marketing opportunities, and we shut down that avenue of conversation. That isn't what we're looking for here. What we're looking for is somebody who can help us win football games. And, so that's why we hired Wayne, because we thought he could help us win football games. We were wrong. But having said that, I think any hire involves risk. Hiring anybody, the future is deeply uncertain, and I think particularly hiring managers or head coaches is very risky. You hire, almost every manager that has been hired has recently been fired. So they've done a bad job somewhere, and if you get the more experienced ones, they've been fired, more than 6 or 7 times. So when you make the hire, you obviously think that you've done the best that you can, but the range of possible outcomes or the risks are still very, very, very strong.
I mean, by the same token, when Portsmouth recruited John Massinho, there was uproar among Portsmouth fans saying, why on earth are we looking to a reserve team player at Oxford United who hasn't even applied for the job? And now, however many years on, he's being hailed as the greatest modern manager in Portsmouth history, which, to be fair, he probably is. So, like you say, you do have to take a risk when you appoint someone with Rooney's profile or someone with Massinho's profile then.
And I think with Rooney, we underrated the risk of the profile. Again, I don't watch celebrity shows. I'm not interested in celebrities. I've lived outside England for 35 years. I knew who Wayne Rooney was, and this sounds impossibly naive, but I had no idea just how much his celebrity status would influence fans. It was a shock to me that you can walk down the street with him and dozens of people keep coming up and pestering him. Well, sorry, pestering is my word. He wouldn't use that word. He reacts very, very well to people, what I would call pestering him.
That goes back to your investment journey, though, doesn't it? And you've talked about it there, and you've mentioned it several times. You talked about variables, you've talked about risk, and you've talked about situation. And I can't help but think that when you're in some of those situations, your decision making needs to go in a particular direction. And much like if you're doubling down on a market, or you're doubling down on a share, or you're looking at a fund that might grow short, medium, long term, you make a decision that you think is going to pay off, and not all of those decisions ever will. That is just the reality of investing in something. The difference being, in this instance, you've only got one choice because you've got.
Correct. You can't have a portfolio. You can't have a portfolio of head coaches. No. Robert Rubin, who was the former head of Goldman Sachs and Treasury Secretary for Bill Clinton, made a commencement speech back in, I think, 1994 or 5. Have I got that right? Might have been a bit later. I forget. But it's about decision making under conditions of uncertainty. If you're making a number of decisions under conditions of uncertainty, it is certain that some of those decisions will be wrong. And it's the same in player recruitment. The trouble is, it's such a small data set when you're hiring managers that it looks like the process has broken down. You really need 30 or 40 data points to know whether the process is working. And we've had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, it's tough. And it's not like you've got a couple of players sat on the bench that if that player that you've signed is not working, you can then switch them out on the field, and one of the 2 or 3 might work. You can't do that with a manager. You've got one shot at it, and you then have
got one shot.
Yeah, at what point do we get out of this trade because it wasn't the right one?
Correct. Well, the way that you had to do it in investing is you had to have pre-commitments about what you think is going to go wrong. Otherwise, you end up, gradually getting sucked into something that's failed to work. And we know from the work of, psychologists that we tend to be what's called risk taking in position of loss. If things are going wrong, you tend to be risk taker and you end up selling too late. So I think in the case of the manager, we've always said we will give the manager a lot of time to prove it himself. And these are the kind of things that we will look for as going wrong, rather than just pure results. Now, at Argyle, results in the first half of last season was so bad, and the underlying performance was actually worse than results. That we did decide to act, but we do look at the underlying data, not just the outcomes. So if you look at is it TFG 21st Group, I think, call it the justice table.
Yes,
where you model expected goals and produce a league table based on that. We got quite a large number of points more in the actual world than we did in the XG world. So we were playing worse than our actual results. So we do try to look at underlying performances, but we try to give head coaches time to prove it, unless there's something that's not football related going wrong.
Yeah, there's a really important message in that, Rich. I think it's really good, really impressive.
And this might sound an incongruous question, given that you've just been relegated to League One, but we've seen Ipswich get promoted to the Premier League. We've seen Luton Town get promoted to the Premier League. We've seen Sunderland get promoted to the Premier League, teams who Plymouth would have been playing fairly regularly over the past few seasons. If you did get back into the Championship, is it realistic at some point to expect that we could see Plymouth also get to the top flight? Could you sustain it?
Well, I think all of those clubs you mentioned have far, far greater financial resources than we do, whether it be Sunderland with a much bigger stadium and revenue base from stadium, whether it be Ipswich with very large injections of capital from. Why is my screen's going dark? That's odd. Large injections of capital. So, but we said a year ago that our mission, 2 years ago, halfway through our first season back in the Championship, that our mission was to compete in the top half, not the bottom half of the Championship. That will require more resources. It will require resources that we can get through the returns on investment that we have made and plan on, would like to continue to make. I hesitate for reasons that will become clear. About 3 years ago, we embarked on a project to build a site for our academy and women's teams, which is a £24 million odd project in joint venture with the Plymouth City Council, the local rugby club, and our own community trust. We raised money from shareholders for that, but we then embarked on trying to find new investors, partly to fund an investment program over the next 5 years that would increase our revenue base, but also to put a little bit more money into the playing budget on the grounds that we could lose money for 2-3 years in a bid to increase the probability of staying in the Championship. We didn't get relegated because of the budget, but it's obviously a contributing factor. And if you can spend a little bit more on the playing squad than you've got, then I think we would have been able to bridge that gap between increased levels of revenue and between now and or then and increased levels of revenue. So we think that if we could find a new investor looking prepared to invest in some of these revenue generating assets, such as an academy site, we're very strong believers that a successful academy will generate revenue for Argyle. Actually, this year, 2 of our academy graduates have left for fees. But also, we want to increase the capacity at Home Park, which is 17,000 amongst the lowest in the Championship. I think Oxford had capacity less than us. So there are investment opportunities that we want to take that would increase the amount of money that we pull in and would increase the amount of money available for the squad. But those investments will take time to come to fruition. So should we be back in the Championship, we would hope to have a new investor who would be able to put a little bit more money into the playing squad on a temporary basis. So we think we can compete successfully by being smart, by still having low budget, by being sustainable, not losing money, by developing the infrastructure, developing the player trading model. But we are never going to be an Ipswich, Leeds, Sunderland who is basically targeting automatic promotion. We've been very clear on this, that we think we can be a top 6 Championship club, but that gives you a 25% shot at, as Billy Bean always said, I can get you to the playoffs. After that, it's a crapshoot. In football, you don't play 162 games, you just play 46 in League One. So the data set's much smaller. So even the league is a little bit of a crapshoot. But, we think we've got a shot at being a Championship club. And we think that if we can be a Championship club, we've got a shot at being in the top half. Top half gives us a shot at the playoffs, and playoffs gives us a shot at the Premier League. Now, the combined probability of all those things coming about is very, very low.
Especially with parachute payments, Simon.
Especially with parachute payments. Well, that's one reason why, we say, the correlation in the Championship, as you know, Rob, better than most, is quite low between what you pay and what you get. But there is, and actually I think last year it was lower than it has been even recently, but there is still a correlation. And when the extremes of parachute payments come back in, then obviously the probability that a relegated club, a recently relegated club, gets re-promoted is very high. But, I think the playoffs are a reasonable goal for a club like Argyle with the resources that we have and that we're developing.
And over time, sorry, Rich, you go.
I was going to say, in terms of attendances, you mentioned there that the capacity is 17,000. What ideally would you like to extend Home Park to, and what kind of attendances do you think you would get if you were, as you say, in the top half of the Championship?
Well, so actually, I meant to finish one of your previous answers to one of your previous questions with this thought. I was talking about how we've restored the pride in Argyle, that most of the fans are pretty happy with the direction that we're going despite relegation. So this season, it looks like we're going to be close to full again. Our season ticket sales have held up. We've got a waiting list for season tickets. So fan support still seems to be there. So that gives us a stadium with a maximum capacity. You know how capacity varies slightly. It's around 17,000. Because we won't be filling the away end so much in League One, it's probable that we're going to average a bit less than 17,000. But we're basically going to be close to sold out for most of this season, as we have been for the last, I think our last 50 plus home games have been sold out. We think that with considerable investment, yet to be specified, but it will be millions, we can get the capacity at Home Park from 17 to about 20. You're going to have to take this one out. Sorry.
All right.
I'll start again. Sorry, that was a sneeze. So we think that with investment in Home Park in the millions, I'm not sure exactly how many, but quite a few million, we can get capacity from 17,000 to 22,000. But beyond that would be, an enormous undertaking. Home Park is over 100 years old. Our main grandstand that we refurbished in the last 5 years is from the early 1950s. One of the problems that we've had from a financial point of view has been that the amount of investment in the stadium has been very, very limited. We covered it and made it all-seater, after Hillsborough and other tragedies. When it was legislated, it had to be all-seater. That was an investment of, I forget, 2 or 3 million, where the local council put in a chunk of the money. But since then, we hadn't until recent years invested very much in the stadium. So, the depreciation charge wasn't met by maintenance expenses, and we've had to do a lot of catch-up maintenance on the stadium, not just expanding capacity, not just making it a lot better, but basically keeping it in trim, keeping it safe, and so on. So that's been a big problem. That's been a big drain on resources over the last 6 or 7 years. And it's an old stadium where our ability to sell stuff to fans is limited. The concourses are not big and wide and like indoor malls, like at many American sports stadium. So our match day take from those 17,000 fans is between £2 and £3, which sounds negligible to probably a Tottenham accountant, or indeed to an American sports ground owner. I don't know what the average take is at my local baseball team, which is the Phillies, but I know that a beer is about $16. So there seems to be a lot of beer drunk. So
50, 60, $70. I wouldn't mind betting.
I wouldn't mind betting that it's something like that. Whether that you could hold that over 40,000 people, I don't know, but something, it would be in the tens of pounds, not low single figures. So but that's been one of our strategies. So we've invested in the grandstand. Sorry, I'm going like that. It's usually my screensaver or my background in online. So we've invested, and it's the screensaver in front of me. So we've invested in the main grandstand, very considerable, which is now producing millions in revenue every year. We've invested in a building that the fans put up with money raised from fans just before COVID. That will enable us to expand our hospitality offering and expand our revenues in midweek, as well as being a place where the football squad can, have their meals and have some meetings and so on. We've also bought back some property behind or to the south of our main grandstand, which we've now turned into a fan zone, which has been a fantastic revenue generator over the second half of last season, when it was the second half of last season or the season before. Anyway, it's been going for either 6 months or 18 months and now gets over 2,000 people turning up to listen to music, play games for the kids, have food and drink. We've also bought a facility that was previously owned by Goals, a five-a-side facility, just to the north of the grandstand, not the grandstand, just to the north of our stadium and adjacent to our training pitches. At the moment, that's a revenue generator, all going into the football squad, but ultimately, again, requiring considerable investment, but could become the basis for a really championship-ready training facility for our first team squad. Again, the infrastructure at Argyle has been underinvested for many, many years. We have two very good training pitches, but the facilities around them are negligible. Players get changed in the changing rooms in the stadium and walk a couple of 100 yards across Central Park, public land, to our two training pitches. So, we need considerable investment in the facilities at Argyle to be of championship standard.
Some really impressive fundamentals there, though, Simon. So if I'm writing an article on Plymouth Argyle for Morning Star, I think I'm saying it's an opportunity with significant upside and with a range of exceptional fundamentals and certainly some good strategy. So I'll give you a 4-star out of that, I think.
Thank you. It's but we have been looking for new investment for a number of years and we haven't found it. It's quite interesting. Maybe you have the answer that I don't. We do have a minority investor now, Argyle Green, a bunch of American limited partners headed by Nick Gianotti, who sits on the Argyle board. They own 12%. They don't have the resources at the moment, anyway, to finance the kind of expansion that we'd like to see. We came very close after a year of talking to doing a transaction with an investor group that eventually came to nothing. And I've talked to many, many people over the last few years about the opportunity at Argyle, but we've not been able to take it forward to even particularly attractive offers. So we're open to conversations.
I was going to say, there you go. So we'll use our very small channel to endorse what you're doing at Plymouth Argyle. And
Thank you
I
very
know
much.
when I get asked about, yeah, when I get asked about well-run football clubs, I do often refer to the work you're doing
Thank you.
down at Argyle, and as I say, those fundamentals I think are great. I really like the infrastructure plans as well around the kind of academy development and that development of a bigger player trading model, because ultimately you've got a huge catchment area now in Devon. It's a principal club in the area, and it should be the target for so many of those young players to come through your academy. And if that means they move on and you get compensation fees or you get transfer fees for them, I think that's the way you incrementally build and you grow the value of the stock, so to speak.
Yeah. I'm not doing this for financial reasons. So the value of the club matters to me, but basically that means that if we get minorities in, I get diluted less. And if we get somebody who's ultimately going to be the owner, I'll get diluted at a slower pace. But I'm not looking to optimize the financial return from my ownership. We do have a competitor in Devon. We have Exeter City, who
True.
are playing in the same division as us. They're a very, very well-run club. They've been incredibly successful with their academy over the last, 15 years, I think.
Yeah, I mean, some
You
of the
know,
young players coming out of Exeter are fantastic. Ollie Watkins is a classic.
Ollie is maybe the poster child at the moment, but Ampadu, I think, also came out of the Exeter Academy. There've been a number, and they've used that money wisely. They've continued to invest in the academy. But we were explicit. I think I contacted Julian Tagg, their chairman, when we began our academy program, and said, "Look, we're coming after you." They've been a club to admire for what they've done in their academy. But you're right. We should be the club of choice for younger players in Devon and Cornwall, and I think we are beginning to get there. We're not entirely there yet, but we've made massive strides under our director of football, Neil Dewsnip, who was with us till January, in restructuring the coaching, restructuring the whole training system, and basically making it a more attractive academy for local clubs in a way that it wasn't 6 or 7 years ago.
Excellent. Well, that's brilliant. Thanks so much for your time, Simon. It's been fascinating to speak to you, and we wish you all the very best
Thank you.
in League One, and all the very best in your quest for investment.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Been a
great to see you
pleasure.
again, Simon. And all the very best from me, and I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Thank you. You've still got to come down to Home Park. I think you promised me
I
about
do.
6 years ago you were going to come.
I do. I will drop you a line. I promise.
You'd both be very welcome anytime you want to come down.
Great stuff.
Thank you very much,
See you
Simon.
there.
Yes, Simon.
Goodbye.